I'll be quick. I haven't read the study. I just took a quick glance at it as you emailed it over. But based on what you're saying, I don't think it necessarily supports the conclusion that you're saying, assuming your conclusion is that cops are not disproportionately forceful with blacks versus whites. So
no, they're more hands-on with blacks than whites.
right, and that's what I'm reading. So like, if blacks and whites are killed at the same rate, it becomes more discussion of like the spectrum of force more than like necessarily the disproportionate application, right? Because like you're talking about a very small sliver on a very large spectrum of force. On the very, very worst end of it is murdering, right? And I think,
mortality,
the numbers show mortality, right? And on that side, that's a very small part of it, right? Like there's a certain, thousands of murders. I don't know, have the numbers in front of me, but there's thousands of murders, let's say, right? But the rest of that spectrum is big, right? And this is where most interactions lie. And that study seems to say, just based on the abstract that I read, that in the rest of that spectrum, Black and Hispanic people are 50% more likely to get hands-on, non-lethal force. So I don't think it really support, all that is really how I would take that is that when it comes to the extreme uses of force, if you're a crappy cop, you're just going to be, you're pretty equal in your willingness to shoot someone, right? But when it comes to everything outside of that, you're much more willing to apply it to Black people and Hispanic people, which I don't that's still like a problem, right? Like,
no, that is the. I was
going to say that is the problem, right?
That's what I was saying.
No, that's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got Matt.
Right.
So, of what Your Highness was saying, is that the crux of the problem? The fact that this is a subjective experience, right? Because Black people have Black people experiences and white people have white people experiences. Like that, in essence, those roads can't cross because you can't change your race. So, I think we have to look at data in some capacity to accomplish something. Because like without data, you can't take government action based on how you feel. It's just, we can't do that. Or at least not historically. So I think that might be the crux of the problem. But in hearing what Adam said, I think that there is don't want to lose my train of thought, on the verge of doing so, but why? What is the problem? Like, why is this the dynamic? And I think that we need to discover, why do cops go hands-on with Black people more frequently? What are the underlying factors? I think that it's incumbent on both races. And I think that doesn't get enough airtime. And to be sure, I know of one gentleman, he used to be a linebacker in the NFL. I think he has a show, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. He very specifically points the finger solely at white people. And I think both races have to do some discovery here to find out, why do police go hands-on with Black people more frequently? And I expect that there will be reasons and driving forces for both races. I think both races contribute to that dynamic. And I think that we have got to figure out the square root of why it's happening. We have to have the emotional response to it, and figure out like, why is it happening? Mm-hmm. And then I think that's when we move to implementation, and that's how we fix it ultimately long term.
Now, just real quick, Stephen, and I totally agree. And just now spinning off that question, Matt, like just interested to hear, why do you think that is happening? Just in your own personal opinion, just when you think about it. So,
knowing that this is a safe space, and knowing that I'm white, and this is a conversation about, I think, I guess my initial thoughts are, relative to the Black experience, I think that.
Really?
Who was that? What happened? Who was that? I didn't even see anybody move their mouth.
It was Adam.
Oh, no, I didn't say anything.
No, it was Rich.
Oh yeah, Rich is froze.
Oh, so you're so distracted down there.
But yeah, go ahead. I'm interested to hear what you think. Like you said, what do you think is the root of the problem?
So, like I said, safe space. So please, like, course correct me if you think I'm out of place. But I think that the average white experience is mother and father in the household, providing some level of guidance and ownership, responsibility, accountability. Because I think that the family unit at the end of the day is such a significant variable in people's lives. And what happens in your family unit shapes your worldview. So I was fortunate enough to have both my parents in my life for the duration. They still are. And I think that if we look at, like I said, correct me if you think I'm out of place, but I think the average Black life experience is, I think, frequently like maybe one parent, a lot of issues in the household. You don't know who to trust. I know there's sensationalized things like, my mom was smoking crack, or I don't even know my dad, he's a piece of shit. I feel like Black people unfortunately have to deal with a fractured home than white people do. And I think I'd stop there because I think that's a lot, and I'm a white person saying it. But that's where my mind goes, with that question.
And just one real quick, Steve, just to go a little further, because I'm just hearing and that's a good observation. Why do you feel that in that particular case about, like you're saying, when you use like the average, it seems like the average Black family doesn't have that family structure and compares to white counterparts. Why do you feel that's historically been the case? I mean, leading up to what you're saying right now.
And this is where, I've thought a lot about Black Lives Matter and a lot of the things that exist under that umbrella. And I think that systemic racism, I think when you think about, going from, it wasn't just slavery ended one day. Like, there were so many different shades of gray. And then, so it was illegal at first, but now, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher this timeline, so please, don't hate me. But it became different shades of gray. Like, it's not a yes or no question anymore. It's okay, well, like, it's separate but equal. Like, you can have your own school as long as it's equal, or you have to use your own water fountain. We can't share water fountains. I think that there were so many different, over an extended period of time, so many different ways to oppress Black people that weren't breaking the law. It was almost the law that allowed you to do it. I was looking the other day at, the crazy tension that's in Portland, Oregon over Black Lives Matter. And I'm thinking to myself, Oregon, that's the Pacific Northwest. That's a very progressive, liberal, earthy, crunchy kind of place. Think about Vancouver, Seattle, Portland. And I wonder, why is so much strife happening in that city specifically over Black Lives Matter? And I did a little bit of reading, and what I learned in, anecdotal and definitely incomplete, but when, I guess, around the end of slavery, obviously a lot of people were moving west. There's a lot of expansion in the US. It's a big piece of land. But from what I understand, in Oregon, for an extended period of time, if you were Black, you couldn't live there. You weren't allowed. So that's what creates a higher percent of the population as KKK, or that creates an environment where that's systemic racism. You have a state that doesn't allow Black people to live there. And I think that's where I would start. And what do you do about it? I have some thoughts and ideas, but I think that's where it all started, and it just kind of snowballed from there, and it hasn't gotten enough attention. So a lot of people don't even understand why it is that way. But I think you have to look at that. It's the history. It's how did we transition out of slavery, and did we really?
Yeah. So it's safe to say that chain of being like you said, to see, okay, the Black families seem to be a lot more broken than the white families. And then you like, okay, why does that happen? You can see the systemic, which you deem the systemic racism, something that was put in a system that leads to broken families of Black people, which leads to this, what we're seeing right now about the mistreatment, the exploiting, the killing. Like, why this, like you say, is a deeper undertone than what's going on. And it channels back to intention when you're talking about systemic. But then it's a surprise, then it's surprising because we can point that out, but then we point out a lot of events today that people are like, well, I can't say that they were doing it with intent. I can't say they were doing it with that, but we can draw a clear line, which I think you just really did good, just to say, from your observation, systemic. leading up to this, you know. So it's like, it's, you know, I just noticed things like that. It's an inconsistency. It's like, I think some people just don't really want to call it like they see it. I think if they really be fair with themselves, like you said, and examine the situation going back historically leading up to now, you can trace a pattern. You can trace and see, and you can see laws and legislation that was implemented in to do certain things on purpose. You know, so just keeping that definitely in mind. I know we had Steve. I know Richard, you just trying to jump in, but I saw Charles' hand after Steve, and then we got Richard, you know.
Yeah, so I'll start with this. Legal is not synonymous to righteous or civilized. There's so much in place that's legal, and because slavery was legal. And I appreciate you going back at least to that point, because that's where the Black family was broken down, right there, split up. You know, it was illegal to marry as Black people in this country. You were considered human, so you couldn't marry. Then moving forward, the Black family did come together during Reconstruction, and it were very strong Black families. And during Reconstruction, there was a period where we were building and building, and of course it was a segregated society, but we were building and building and building, had industries and so on and so forth. Integration happened, and also a lot of that was dispersed. As far as our efforts, we actually took our monies and went elsewhere. Then, with the way that we dealt with poverty as opposed to a collective, because we were locked out, there was welfare from the government. But then the government set it up to where, like, no, there cannot be a man in the house. There cannot. We will take care of your children. We will make sure that the mother and the children are taken care of, but the man cannot be around. And so, I mean, and you have some people who actually call welfare, they see welfare as reparations. And the reality of reparations is, everyone that was paid reparations, there was a whole man in the house. There was a whole man in the house, when a whole man in the house, when that household, that business, that whatever, received reparations. Japanese, even the so-called slave owners will receive reparations, when the so-called slave didn't. So these are the things. So, and I like you going back, because it's like, okay, the fatherlessness, broken home, all these. How did we get here? And see, that's the piece that we have to be honest about. To look at a condition and say that's just how it is, or look at the condition that says these are the contributing factors and this is how we got here, because it wasn't always like this. So, and then from there, when you're honest and you're saying, okay, or I'll say civilized and humane, you're saying, okay, how do we undo this? How do we get the Black family back together? How do we deal with these? And I keep saying these things because the reality, I've seen this pattern over and over again. That which happens and allowed to happen in Black and brown communities spills over. You cannot quarantine the ills of society. You can't do it. It's been tried over and over again, and it spills right over. And then all of a sudden, it's an epidemic. Crack, AIDS. Now it's police brutality. You can't quarantine it. So stop it if you stop it there, stop it right with the Black and brown community. It won't spread because it's dead.
All right. We got Charles and we got Richard.
I think where I come at these issues, and I know this is where Your Highness and I have differed historically through our conversations. We rarely disagree, but for too much. But I think this is one of the sticking points for us. I want to flag this a difference between, and maybe these are not technical terms, but for the sake of the conversation, historical racism versus systematic. Like for me, when I think of systematic, I'm thinking of a proactive move to stop upward mobility of a certain group. And maybe this is my naivete speaking, but it's my position. I don't think that systemic racism with that definition is necessarily at play most of the time in the lives of Black men. And again, that's the luxury for me to take that liberty and say something like that. I think historical racism is important, right? Because that helps us establish how we got. And I think most people on this call would agree that the history of racism has left a legacy of poverty, which begets crime, which begets interactions with police. And you can see where there can be a vicious cycle there. And I do think it's worth looking backwards. And I'm at this point, I'm not against reparations. I know that's a hot topic. I think it might be a worthwhile endeavor, right? Because if a large group of people are in situations now because of something that happened in the past that was of no fault of their own, and from what I understand, in the case of reparations, the country can afford it. The United States can afford to pay reparations. So I think that would be a worthwhile endeavor. But I want to talk a little bit more about what to do now outside of that, because I think we spend a lot of time trying to find the source, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about what to do, right? Because these things keep happening. So it's like, what do we do now proactively? And it seems to me a big thing would be exposure, right? Like, I feel like integrating of schools before I was born changed my life for the better, right? Like, my experience, like having known closely people of different races, in this case, particularly Black people, has caused me to have more empathy and caused me to have more just like logical rationale when dealing with other people, to not make like generalizations about them based on the color of their skin. And I think a lot of people don't have that experience, right? Like, they just stick with their own group. And so there's like generalized mistrust, Roger that. And so I think there should be some degree of like, I think these things that we do now in schools and in businesses where we're taking steps to like diversify these areas, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. And I think it makes a huge difference for people later in their lives, for them to have, just not have so much mistrust. And the other piece, which is going to be less popular, I think more funding for police, and which would allow them to have higher standards. Right now, I think police forces choose from a terrible pool of candidates, like the kind of people that want to be police. Their alternatives weren't great. And so I think it should be a more sought after position that maybe paid more, so you could attract a better quality person to want to be involved.
Okay. All right, Richard, we got you.
Yeah, I think Charles touched on the general, like sort of thrust of what my feeling towards this specific topic. I historically speaking, don't like to spend too much time talking about how we got here, though I know that there is there's some productiveness that can come from it in terms of knowing how we might work our way out of it. I prefer to spend my time talking about what we do today and how we sort of get out of it. And I can't help, and this is probably not going to be a popular thing, and again, I think I'm going to get pegged after this call, but like, I can't help but feel in some way, I don't know, like, I don't need themselves for me to make me feel better about my ability to live in this world and to achieve. I get that there's racism. The degree to which it affects my life and people who look like me's lives, I think, is up for debate. But I don't want to spend my time talking about that. I think I focus my energy on controlling the things that I personally can control. Now, I have to say this in order to be fair. I am also speaking from a place of privilege, because I wasn't raised in some of those numbers that Matt was laying out. But I can't help but feel like when all we do is talk about the history of, we're in some ways making this sort of like case that Black people are uniquely damaged in a way that they can't get themselves out of. And I hate it. I feel like somehow not that we don't have enough ourselves to pull ourselves out of it, but it's just, I don't know. It seems reliant on other people to help save us from this thing. And again, maybe I'm not being fair, and I get that I am speaking from a place of privilege, but I just, how that translates with this conversation, oftentimes when we only talk about the history of how we got here, how to me it translates is this situation where everything that happens, we end up, I don't want to say blaming it on historic racism or systematic racism or however you want to frame it up, But there is this like reflexive, like reaction of, somehow, some way, somewhere, it is the systemic or historical racism that put us here. Therefore, we kind of like throw our hands up and we take no ownership of what we could have potentially controlled to not be in this situation. And that to me is tough.
All right. Definitely we got Matt, we got Adam, we got Steve, but just real quick, I want to see if y'all can chime in on this real quick. And what do you think? What does the idea of sounding like, how does it sound to you when you get to the source of an issue? Therein lies the answer. I mean, because we know, like you say, just how does that sound? How's that idea sound to y'all?
I think almost. If I'm understanding the parameters of what we're talking about enough, like you kind of have to understand how it happened to formulate what to do about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're way past understanding how it happened. We are.
I don't think we are.
And
I don't think so, man.
Oh, sorry, guys. Hold on. I'm getting a call that I have to take. I'm sorry.
Okay. We'll continue on, but I just want to throw that out there because, because I knew Charles, you said something about you don't know if you can really pinpoint the origin, but it's happening now and where we go forward from here. And then I know Richard mentioned something about, we talk about all these things, but I'm interested in talking about where we go forward.
Well, and just to be clear, I want to just let me reclassify what I said.
My bad. I don't want to give a false narrative. My bad.
Yeah. So I agree with the history, and I agree that the history is the source of like how we got to some of these issues. I just take issue with the existence of a proactive movement to stop the upward mobility of Black people, as like a conspiracy or an attempt to let's keep things the way they are. That's my position.
Yeah. And I'll just okay. I mean, so how do y'all?
And by all means, take it apart.
No.
I just want to be clear.
That's why we having this open discussion. But I just want to throw that idea out there because usually, from my experience, when you get to the root of an issue, the solution lies right there. All you have to do is reverse it. You just go the other way. And if you took 10 steps and that's the source of the issue, and you're trying to get away from that, you turn around as 180 and you do 10 steps the other way. You know what I'm saying?
But guys, and I'm sorry, I missed the small part of it. There's no way to. In fact, you're right. You're right, Your Highness. What happened to Black people was that they lost control. And again, this is something Charles and I have spent a lot of time talking about, is that through his history, we've lost our agency. And what we need to do in a lot of ways, I'm not saying it's the only thing, but in part, it's the only thing that we exclusively have control over, is take back our agency in this equation. I'm not suggesting that it's on Black people to fix all the problems that they didn't create for themselves. I'm just saying that one part of the solution is going to be, and a big part of that solution is going to be us taking back control of the things that we can today control. That's going to be a part of it. I don't know to what degree it's going to have an impact or put us where we need to be, but that's going to be a huge part of it. So let's do it.
I feel you. All right, just get back on. Or we got Matt, we got Steve, and then we got Adam, I think. Or was that back at
Adam was before me.
Adam, okay.
Is there any way we can take
Adam, Steve?
Is there any way we can take a bathroom break? I don't want to miss this, man. Like,
I need you here for what I got to say, Charles.
Yeah, man, I gotta be here for this because Adam is gonna come.
I want to talk to you.
Go ahead.
I'm waiting to talk to you, so you gonna take that bathroom break.
Adam, take that headset off. Wait your damn turn. You need the mic.
Well, I'm gonna run it through there.
Yeah. We can do it. Yeah, sleep right here. We'll come right back because this
2 minutes.